Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, I normally do not discuss other podcasts, other YouTube channels. Don't usually do it. I at times have issue with the Denis Davidov podcast channel and his cowardice flight to Europe and then profits off the ongoing war. But I was listening today to the PBD podcast, the Patrick David Bett podcast, and it's interesting at times to hear individuals who don't have all the pieces to the puzzle trying to explain the puzzle. And yesterday, or maybe it was earlier today, it was the last recorded podcast, but they were discussing the missile that was launched at that Ukrainian city, but they were also discussing third-party commentary. They were discussing what they believed was one person's opinion about the alleged fact that the Ukrainians, the Ukraine, had actual control over vast amounts of nuclear weapons at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, and then the subsequent transfer of those nuclear weapons back to the Russian Federation. Look, the Ukrainians never controlled nuclear weapons. And you will hear this time and time and time again from these Ukrainian supporters that for some reason believe they actually controlled nuclear weapons. The new state of the Ukraine controlled nuclear weapons. That was never the case. Were there nuclear weapons on Ukrainian soil? Yes, there was. There were approximately 44 strategic bombers. There were 176 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and up to just under 2,000 other various nuclear weapon systems. But those nuclear weapons were never under the control of the Ukrainian state. Okay? Never. The launch sequence, the codes, the ability to have permission to launch those weapon systems were never given to the Ukrainian state. There were nuclear weapons there, but there was no ability for the Ukrainians to launch those systems. That was all done from Moscow. Moscow had always retained control over those nuclear weapons. It was just semantics. It was just the rubber stamp to then move those weapons upon agreement to the Russian Federation or dispose of those missiles and missile silos on site, which in some cases was cheaper, with some Western assistance, and that's what happened. But again, the Ukrainians never controlled nuclear weapons. You have to understand that. Never, ever, ever, ever controlled nuclear weapons. Now, to say that the Ukrainians had granted permission to dispose of those nuclear weapons or send those weapons back to the Russian Federation in exchange for some sort of long-term peace plan, well, that was done under the agreement in which the Ukraine would not become a hostile entity towards the Russian Federation. That's just the way it is. Think about this for a second. If the shoe was on the other foot and the Warsaw Pact was victorious during the Cold War, let's say there was an economic collapse in the United States, and let's say, for instance, that West Germany decided to then join the Warsaw Pact, how would Germany then be treated by the United States, which would still essentially be against the Warsaw Pact? Now, look, I get it's a bit hypothetical, but again, in regards to the Ukraine and its security guarantees and its handing over these weapon systems, these nuclear weapons that were never under their control, for these security guarantees, as long as the Ukraine did not become a hostile entity. Once that happened, it was game over in terms of how the Russians perceived the Ukraine. Once the Ukrainians were looking to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Russians had the ability to see how insidious and expansive NATO had become, and Russia understanding that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was not just a defensive organization. Again, look at Libya, look at Serbia, look at Kosovo. Serbia was never a threat to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But the NATO concocted this reason for then bombing Serbia, which was never a threat. This was an internal issue between the Serbs and this breakaway province of Kosovo. I got to go to the other map here to pull that up. Kosovo, Serbia. Kosovo, part of Serbia. Never a threat. Never a threat. Not to NATO, but NATO took action against Serbia. Okay, that is not a defensive alliance. No member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was in jeopardy. Libya, a completely different region in North Africa, suddenly became the focus of a North Atlantic Treaty Organization bombing campaign. Again, no threat, internal issue. So then to say, well, it's perfectly acceptable for the Ukrainians to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization at the same time of declaring Russia a hostile state, not going to happen. It changed the paradigm completely. The Ukraine and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization created the environment that we are now existing in. There was no reason, no need for NATO to expand into Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. And then finally, the nail in the coffin, the breaking of the proverbial back was what happened with the Ukraine. Presumably on this quest to join NATO, changing the rules. And that's what happened. But no, the Ukraine never controlled nuclear weapons, and the agreement to respect the territory of the Ukraine was acknowledged by the Russian Federation for many, many years. The Russians could have launched an operation back in 2014 with probably much greater success if it really had wanted to simply take control of the Ukraine. Again, it wasn't until NATO started positioning itself as moving into the Ukraine did the Russians react and respond. But again, the Ukraine never controlled nuclear weapons. They did not have the capability of launching those systems, and it's really a kind of a moot point at this moment. Now, the war continues. The collapse of the Kharkova pocket continues. If we go back again over the last few days and can watch what is happening, just a devastating collapse of this pocket that will soon see the Russians control all of this territory in one continuous front line running to the south by southwest of Volhodar all the way towards the very outskirts of Pokrovsk. At the same time, we have additional reports of the weapon system that was used in Dnipro. The Russians are claiming this was a new conventionally armed ballistic missile system. And again, this war is about adaptation. And going into this conflict, I have to wonder if the Russians underestimated some of the capabilities, especially around the Patriot and some of these air defense, these more advanced air defense systems. They have been effective, then they have been ineffective in some cases. But this new weapon system that the Russians used in Dnipro did two things. One, it proved that the Russians can strike any target within 3,500 miles, maybe more, from the borders of the Russian Federation with a conventionally armed missile system that cannot be intercepted by Western air defense systems, be it the Aster 30, the Patriot PAC-3, what have you, PAC-2, more or less the PAC-3, and even possibly the THAAD. This was a show of strength, a show of power. You'll see different video footage. Some video footage shows other weapon systems actively striking near Dnipro. The Russians use various weapon systems in this strike package. They used cruise missiles. They used Killjoy, ballistic air-launched systems, and then they used this new system based on the RS-26 conventional variant of that system. And it was very effective. It hit its target. It struck its target. It made a statement, and that statement is hey, if we want to, we can do what we did in Dnipro to London. We can do it to Paris. We can strike you. We can reach out and strike you. We could reach out and strike Anchorage, Alaska, with a conventionally armed weapon system because you are launching conventionally armed weapon systems into the Russian Federation. And make no mistake, this is not the Ukraine obtaining this targeting information, inputting the targeting coordinates into these weapon systems, and then allowing those weapon systems to hit targets in Russia. This is coming from NATO. NATO and the United States are giving the Ukrainians the ability to hit these targets inside of Russia. And the Russians made a statement. Now, what happens next? What happens next? Now, the ball is in NATO's court, in the court of Washington, D.C. and the figurehead administration of Joseph Biden. What happens next? Is the response going to be to step down and stop targeting facilities inside of the Russian Federation, or do they up the ante and continue to launch these strikes inside of Russia? Because if that happens, there is going to be another response. There is going to be another escalation by the Russians, possibly outside of the Ukraine. So who's going to back down first? And this is the, as I've talked about many times, the pathway, the track of escalation. So we're going to have to watch what happens next. What happens next in terms of the response by NATO and the United States is very important. Do they continue to hit targets in Russia? And then what does Russia do next? We'll have to see. There we have it. More to come. As always, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.